Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I just wanted to do this quick video. I mentioned in class that I would take a little bit of time and just highlight some of the things that A, we didn't get to talk about in class, and B, things that maybe were in that Brinkley text. So just to reemphasize some of the timeline, this is primarily about the war itself and about the Treaty of Paris, just so you have a sense at the end of the war. We were addressing a few things in terms of military strategies. What were some ways that Americans went about the war? And you can see that on the left-hand side, trying to exhaust the British, basically. The Brits had, to really depend on supplies from across the Atlantic. And many of these supplies were being held and housed in ships that are around the coast of some of the cities in the northern colonies. So, this is a war of attrition, trying to wear down the British. You have some guerrilla tactics, and I think that becomes significant, especially in some parts of America. For sure, there's also a lot of battles that are fought on massive fields with people in line, who are fighting in rows and coming fairly close to opponents. We do have the Americans, for the most part, using flintlock muskets, and maybe about 100 yards or so would be the distance where it would be possible to use a musket to, oppose the other side. If you think about the, kind of degree of movement that happens in this war. One of the things I posted for you was an interactive map. It's actually like a video clip that's an interactive map, and it kind of is like a 15-minute description of some of the major battles. It's optional, it's under the quiz assignment, but it's actually pretty good. I posted it because I think it's a great way to see some of the evolution of the war. It's just the actual locations, and you get a sense of how much movement there is, because it's not really just the British and the Americans. They are also bringing in numbers of other groups, so Native Americans, for example, and lots of troops are splitting up. So you have splitting up and meetups and just a great deal of movement, and especially in the beginning of the war. I noted when we were looking at the Revolutionary War map that Washington, really was good at retreating and retreating successfully, and then kind of going into hiding in a sense. So battles really only happened when, troops were essentially face to face. So a lot of the time of the war is also spent moving out of the way of oncoming troops, or trying to chase troops, find troops. So, a lot of movement. And there's also an alliance, of course, with France that's going to be coming down the line. It doesn't happen early in the war. It won't happen until after the Battle of Saratoga, which is, widely known as the turning point of the war. But something that's just important to recognize is that France was definitely giving supplies and money long before they were officially an ally. A couple of things about the British. The British did have some strategies too. Something they try very early on is they're interested in breaking the colonies in half, trying to cut off New England basically from the rest of the colonies, trying to isolate New England. They're also going to use their navy to blockade the ports, try to make it very difficult for the colonists to get any type of resource from anywhere else. And the colonists will be very much struggling in terms of trying to get supplies. In some cases, the colonists like literally steal British weapons. In some cases, they are, bringing their own weapons to the fight. So you have different, calibers of bullets and things like that that get used. You have also a divide and conquer. So especially toward the end of the war, where there's a movement of the British into the South, a lot of that is with the intent of trying to galvanize loyalists and people who could potentially be loyalists. And the British anticipate there will be a large number of loyalists that are going to be joining up. A couple of other things. I know that you all wrote some of the blog posts about Gary Nash and some of his critics. Do look over that for the quiz. I thought you all did a nice job highlighting some of the distinctions between Nash's argument and some of his critics. Continue to use examples. So look at your peers' comments as well. Take note of some of the examples that Nash might use to make his argument. And then a couple of things that I think come down in the Brinkley text is just kind of taking some of the war and placing it in a few different categories, starting out in the north, the northern campaign. And you can see kind of in the, you know, bottom right corner, you can see the location of Boston, and you can see Concord and Lexington and Bunker Hill. Certainly, a lot of the first part of the war is happening around Boston, and this makes sense because of um, intolerable acts and the punishment on Boston and the way in which, Boston was kind of this area of tension. You can also see Fort Ticonderoga on the map. That becomes a fort that Americans take over and actually take a great amount of weaponry from, cannon fire and everything, and all of that is brought to other locations, mostly by Henry Knox. And then you also can see, movement all the way into Canada. And so there's a great deal of the first phase of the war that really happens in the North. When you look at Bunker Hill, this is just an image of Bunker Hill. Just kind of keep in mind, this is in June of 1775. So this is still like a good year before the Declaration of Independence. We talked about Bunker Hill a little bit in class. This is just really a map that gives you a sense of it. You don't have to go over the entirety of the battle itself, but the really big takeaway is that, the British do have really high casualties as a result of this battle, and Americans to some degree get a little bit of a boost of confidence. The British have to kind of, realize that this war is going to take a little longer than perhaps they thought. There is a little bit more extensive of a campaign. After the British evacuate and leave Boston, it's unclear immediately where they're going to go, but soon the British Navy will pop up outside the coast of Manhattan, and you see New York City is set on fire, and the British will ultimately, you know, be taking on New York City for a good amount of the war, and it becomes kind of a loyalist hotbed. And New York City will be a place where, the British Army spends a great deal of its time. You can see the Thomas Paine quote on the top from his essay and pamphlet, the notion of not common sense, I'm sorry, the crisis, the American crisis. That's where we see the phrase, "These are the times that try men's souls." And the image that you're looking at is the image right out the window at BCA. This would be the Steuben House, and kind of looking at the space that is the Hackensack River. And at the time, lots of homes are on the river. This is a time where a good amount of transportation happened by boat. And so as people are going up and down the Hackensack River, they would be able to communicate and talk to, a variety of people. It's kind of like a highway of its time. Of course, people are also using, carriages and whatnot. But so when Washington troops find themselves um, fleeing the troops of the British in the areas of New York and New Jersey. And there's a series of battles, the Battle of Brooklyn and the Battle of Washington Heights, and the takeover of Fort Lee. There's a great deal of movement then through New Jersey, and Washington takes his troops, which are very small at this time. It's really a ragtag group by the time Washington gets to Pennsylvania, and Washington tries a plan to surprise a group of Hessians. These are mercenaries who are fighting for the British, being paid to fight for the British. Hessians are just Germans, and it's like Christmas Eve and or Christmas Day, and Washington crosses the Delaware. This is the painting that I was noting in class the other day, where there is a kind of Washington almost like with his foot, on the boat. And, it's almost a surreal kind of image, but it gives us a sense of later on how some people viewed Washington. This particular painting was painted by a German painter, Emanuel Leutze, in the 1850s. So it's much later time, really fits into Emanuel Leutze's time and some of the commentary that he wants to make about leadership in Germany, but it also kind of speaks to maybe the reputation that Washington has a little bit, and that becomes significant. This particular bold action does have the effect of surprising the Hessians. They lose the Battle of Trenton, and then what follows is the Battle of Princeton. And ultimately, this kind of keeps the Americans in the war. The Battle of Trenton and Washington crossing the Delaware is not really the true turning point of the war. That will come a little bit later. But for the most part, we really do get some increased confidence. And it's very likely, had we not seen the Battle of Trenton going Washington's way, that the colonists would have been out of the war a lot earlier on. A couple of things that we see follow is into 1777. One of the names that you bump into a lot is Howe as one of the British generals. He's a British general who is actually, back at home in England, quite favorable to the colonists' argument. So he's actually somebody who, kind of gets, in a sense, some of what the colonists are saying. And he is not really somebody who is aggressive in chasing Washington, at least in some cases. He is supposed to, meet up with some other British troops in the area of upstate New York. But he decides not to do that, and he kind of takes his troops his own way. And General Howe will bring British troops into Philadelphia. And there's some battles on the way, but we see the takeover of Philadelphia. So not only New York, but also Philadelphia, and, massive consequences from that. You also will see the Battle of Saratoga. This becomes the turning point of the war. And, without going into a great deal of detail about it, this is a battle that takes place at a few kind of farm sites. And, the British are very, very in disarray and undermanned. And they end up being surrounded, and they don't really have a way out. So Saratoga becomes the turning point of the war, and also one that brings France into the war. So some of the really significant aspect of the Battle of Saratoga is that you have France kind of agree that it's possible the Americans might win this war, and so they're more likely to support the American cause. This gives us a sense of the Battle of Saratoga. I'm not going to go into all the details of the battles. It's actually several battles, like kind of tied together. Some people would clearly blame General Howe. There's several British troops that are supposed to meet up. It doesn't happen that way. So some British troops end up being surrounded by Americans. But there's a series of battles, and Burgoyne, who is the British general, will surrender. The last thing that the British really try to do in terms of a phase of the war is to go to the South, where there's an expectation that these loyalists are going to kind of, come out of the woodwork, and that doesn't happen. We actually see some colonial successes toward the end of the war, and this is where, the battle of attrition is going to play out. The British kind of want this war to end. You also have the French. So the French bring a great deal of not only military capability, but also a navy. And so the Battle of Yorktown, which is where the British ultimately surrender, is a battle that notably benefits from French participation. So it's not only an American-led campaign, there's also a great deal of contributions from the French, okay? Britain's, southern strategy will completely backfire. Southern resources, are going to be generally more valuable and worth preserving the idea of uh, that there is a um, there isn't going to be a a giant